Before we get started, if you enjoy relaxing late-night scary stories, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. I post new true creepy tales every week, perfect for drifting off to sleep with just the right amount of chills. Your support helps keep these stories coming, so grab a blanket, settle in, and let's begin. It was a breezy Saturday morning in late April, one of those days when the air smells faintly of rain even though the sun is out. I had a long to-do list taped to my fridge: groceries, a stop at the hardware store, maybe finally vacuuming the car, but as I was driving down Garrison Street, a cardboard sign caught my eye. Yard sale, everything must go. The sign was barely hanging on to a wooden stake, the letters thick and uneven like they'd been painted by hand years ago. I almost kept going, but something about the way the arrow pointed up a cracked driveway made me slow down. Without thinking, I flicked on my blinker and pulled over. The sale was small, set up in the patchy front yard of a pale yellow house with peeling shutters. A few folding tables sagged under mismatched kitchenware, old board games, and stacks of books. Nothing remarkable, I'd been to 100 sales just like it. The man running it looked to be in his mid-50s, wearing a faded denim shirt and mirrored sunglasses despite the shade. He didn't greet me, just nodded once before going back to sipping from a styrofoam cup. I walked slowly down the tables, running my fingers over scratched ceramic plates and tangled jewelry chains. That's when I noticed it, an unmarked cardboard box tucked half under the last table, away from the main display. It was sealed with brittle brown packing tape, edges frayed and soft with age. I crouched down and tried to lift it. It wasn't heavy, but there was a solid, uneven weight inside, the kind that shifts all at once if you tilt it too far. "Mind if I take a look in here?" I asked, glancing toward the man. He shrugged without turning his head. "Found that in the attic. Just old junk. If you want it, go ahead." I peeled away the dried tape slowly, the sound crackling louder than I expected in the still air. The lid didn't lift easily. The cardboard had warped, clinging to itself after years of being closed. When it finally gave, a dusty smell rose up, faint but sharp, like the back of a forgotten closet. Inside, I saw a jumble of items. A handful of faded hair ties. 2 rust-speckled keys on a ring that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. A small, ivory-colored hairbrush with broken bristles. Beneath those sat a neat stack of folded newspaper clippings, yellowed and curled at the edges. My fingertips were already smudged with dust when I picked one up. The headline hit me harder than I could explain. "Unidentified woman found dead in river, foul play suspected." I skimmed the first few lines. The victim had been discovered in the spring of 1984, just outside of our county limits. A brunette woman in her late 20s. No ID, no purse, no witnesses. The article called her River Jane Doe. I pulled out more clippings. Every single one was about her. Updates from the weeks after the body was found, speculation about suspects, even an old anniversary article from the 90s where a detective admitted the case had gone cold. Mixed in with the papers were black and white photographs. They were grainy and poorly developed, but they showed a woman who looked exactly like the artist's sketch from the articles, walking alone on a rainy street, sitting at a diner booth, glancing over her shoulder in what looked like a parking lot. The pit in my stomach grew heavier with every photo I flipped through. I straightened up and looked toward the man behind the table. He was still sipping from his cup, still not looking at me. "You ever read these?" I asked, holding up a clipping. He tilted his head like he hadn't heard me at first. "Nope. Like I said, found it in the attic. Didn't know what was in there until I brought it down this morning." Something about his voice was flat, deliberate. Like he wanted to keep the conversation as short as possible. "Do you know who she is?" I asked, lifting one of the photos so he could see it. He finally turned his head, but only for a second. His expression didn't change behind the mirrored lenses. "No idea. Never seen her in my life." The way he said it made my skin prickle. No follow-up questions. No curiosity. If I'd found something like this in my attic, I'd have a million questions. I glanced back at the box. A pair of earrings lay tangled in the corner, silver tarnished black with age. There was also a small, water-stained notebook wedged under the newspapers, but I didn't pull it out yet. How much for the box? I asked. $5, he said without hesitation. I hesitated, my thumb tracing the frayed cardboard edge. Something about the whole thing felt wrong, but my curiosity was already hooked deep. I reached into my bag, pulled out a crumpled bill, and handed it to him. He took it with barely a glance, dropped it into a dented cash tin, and went back to his drink like the conversation was over. I slid the box out from under the table and carried it carefully to my car. It didn't rattle much, just a muted shifting of paper and something heavier inside. I placed it on the passenger seat, closed the door, and felt the strangest urge to check the rearview mirror, as if the man might be watching me drive away. When I pulled into my driveway 15 minutes later, the sun was higher but the air felt colder. I carried the box inside and set it on my kitchen table. My cat, Darcy, jumped up immediately, sniffing at the corner with unusual interest. "Not for you," I muttered, sliding her down to the floor. One by one, I laid the contents out across the table. The clippings formed a patchwork of headlines and dates spanning nearly a decade. Some had coffee rings, others small tears along the edges. A couple were folded into tiny squares, as if they'd been hidden in a pocket for years. I finally pulled out the small notebook. Its cover was cracked faux leather, the pages inside faintly stained. Most were blank, but the first few held cramped handwriting in blue ink, lists of dates, places, and what looked like initials. May 2nd, KF, 11:30, diner. May 9th, ST, 3:15, bus stop. May 16th, D, 4:45, library. Some lines had checkmarks next to them. Others had a single X. A cold tingle crawled up my neck. It read like a schedule. A record of sightings. I glanced at one of the photographs, the woman in the diner booth, and then back to the May 2nd entry. Was KF her initials? Was the checkmark confirmation? The more I looked, the more deliberate it all seemed. This wasn't a box of random keepsakes. It was organized. Curated. I was halfway through comparing the notebook dates to the newspaper articles when my phone rang, making me jump. The screen showed my husband, Ben. "You home already?" he asked when I answered. "Yeah. You're not going to believe what I found at a yard sale." I told him everything in a quick rush, the box, the articles, the photos, the strange attitude of the seller. I expected him to laugh it off, but instead there was a pause. "That sounds like evidence," he said slowly. "Like actual evidence. You shouldn't even be touching it without gloves." "I didn't think of that," I admitted, glancing at the mess on the table. "I'm serious, Lauren. That's a cold case. You need to call the police. Right now." I looked at the photos again. The woman's blurred face stared back at me from 30 years ago. "I'll wait until you get home," I said. "We can look at it together first." Ben sighed but agreed. "Fine. But don't go showing it to anyone else." I hung up and went back to the table, this time slipping on a pair of dish gloves. I returned the items to the box carefully, though I kept the notebook out. There was something about those entries that I couldn't stop thinking about, the precision of the times, the initials. By the time Ben walked through the door that evening, I'd read through it twice more. He stood over the table, frowning down at the spread of clippings and photos. "This is too much to be a coincidence," he said finally. "Whoever had this box, they knew her. Maybe even followed her. Or, I started, then stopped. Or what? Or they were the one who killed her." We looked at each other in silence for a moment. "Lauren," he said, his voice low, "don't touch anything else. I'm calling it in." The next morning, 2 uniformed officers and a detective came to the house. They photographed the table, bagged the contents, and took my statement. I told them about the man at the yard sale, described his clothes, his sunglasses, the way he barely looked at me. The detective nodded, jotting notes. "We'll have someone talk to him. Do you think this could help?" I asked. "It's possible," he said. "Even if it doesn't solve the case, it could connect dots we didn't have before." When they left, the table was empty, except for a faint ring of dust where the box had sat. I thought I'd feel relieved, but instead I felt hollow, like I'd given away something that had been whispering to me all night. That night, as I locked the front door, a thought crept in uninvited. What if the man from the yard sale knew I took the box? And what if he wanted it back? It was the first Saturday in June, already hot enough that the air shimmered above the asphalt. I was halfway through my usual morning walk when I saw the cluster of folding tables set up on a lawn at the corner of Chestnut and Dover. A handwritten sign leaned against a mailbox. "Yard sale, cash only, no early birds." A few people milled around, flipping through books and kitchen gadgets. I almost kept walking. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, but a flash of blue caught my eye. It was a lawn chair. Not just any lawn chair, but the same woven plastic style my grandmother had on her porch when I was a kid, turquoise and white with faded aluminum arms. I drifted toward it, brushing my hand over the warm vinyl strips. That's when I heard the voices. At first, it was just a woman's tone, sharp, insistent, coming from a table 2 rows over. I couldn't make out her words over the hum of small talk and car engines, but there was tension in them, the kind that carries. I shifted so I could see. The woman was in her 40s, hair pulled back in a tight bun, pointing at a cardboard box neatly filled with white china plates edged in gold. Across from her stood a tall man with a gray beard and a baseball cap, maybe in his 60s. His arms were crossed, knuckles white. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rising, "those are marked at $25 for the set." "That's already a bargain." "They're not worth half that," she shot back. "Look, chips, scratches. I'm doing you a favor offering 10. "They're antique Noritake," he said, stepping closer. "And they're mine." I realized neither of them was hosting the sale. The real host, a woman in a floral sundress, was helping someone else at the far end of the yard. The bun-haired woman gave a short, bitter laugh. "You've been circling them like a vulture for 10 minutes. If you wanted them, you should have bought them already." He leaned forward over the table. "Lady, you walk away right now, or what?" She snapped. Their voices were carrying now, turning heads. A man holding a box of paperback set it down, watching. A teenage boy near the lemonade stand stopped pouring mid-cup. The host finally noticed, hurrying over with her hands raised. Hey, what's going on here?" But before she could reach them, the bun-haired woman snatched one of the plates from the box and lifted it over her head. "If I can't have it." She didn't finish. The older man lunged forward, grabbing the plate with both hands. The plate wobbled between them like a trapped bird, both of them gripping the slick porcelain with white-knuckled determination. "Let go," she shouted, twisting her wrist. "Drop it," he barked back, yanking it toward him. Their elbows bumped the edge of the table, rattling the rest of the china. For a split second, I thought they might both come to their senses, but then his grip tightened, and he wrenched the plate with a sharp turn of his shoulders. The motion sent him off balance. His left foot slid off the uneven lawn and onto the cracked driveway. The plate tore free from her hands, but the momentum carried him backward. There was a sickening sound, not just porcelain shattering, but the heavy thud of a body hitting the ground. The man's baseball cap rolled off, revealing a shock of thin white hair. He lay on his side, one arm cradling his midsection. "Oh my God," someone gasped. The plate lay in pieces near his legs, jagged edges glinting in the sunlight. At first, I thought he'd just fallen awkwardly. But then I saw the crimson seeping into his light khaki shirt, blooming fast. The bun-haired woman froze, her eyes wide. I didn't. He made a guttural sound, somewhere between a groan and a gasp, clutching at the spot where the blood spread. A sharp shard of porcelain was lodged deep in his stomach, glistening wet. The host dropped to her knees beside him, hands shaking. "Someone call 911. Now." 2 men pulled out their phones at once. I knelt a few feet away, unsure whether to help hold him still or keep the crowd back. His breathing was shallow, his eyes darting between the faces looming over him. The woman who'd fought him for the plate started to cry, loud, panicked sobs. "I didn't. Move back," the host said sharply, glancing up at her. "You're making it worse." The sound of sirens reached us within minutes, though it felt longer. The paramedics swarmed him, cutting away his shirt, pressing gauze over the wound. He grimaced, eyes glassy. A uniformed officer guided the crying woman toward the curb, asking her questions she barely answered. She kept wringing her hands, staring at the blood on the driveway. They loaded him into the ambulance, lights flashing, and drove away. The officer stayed, taking statements from anyone who'd seen what happened. When he reached me, I told him everything I could remember, the arguing, the plate, the fall. My voice caught when I got to the part where I saw the blood. By the time I walked home, the image of the man's wide, frightened eyes wouldn't leave me. And the bun-haired woman's words echoed in my head, shaky and desperate, "I didn't mean to." The next morning, my neighbor told me the man hadn't made it through surgery. And that was when the small-town whispers began. They didn't call it an accident. They didn't call it bad luck. They called it murder. The news traveled fast in our neighborhood, the kind of fast that makes it feel like everyone was standing there watching when it happened, even if they were blocks away. By Monday morning, I overheard 2 women in the corner cafe whispering about that fight at the yard sale. One of them claimed the woman had been arrested on the spot. The other said no, the police had let her go home because it was just an accident. It wasn't until later that day, when I bumped into the host of the sale, her name was Joyce, that I got anything close to the truth. They questioned her for hours, Joyce told me, her voice low. Said she started it, but they couldn't prove intent. No charges, at least not yet. We were standing outside the post office, the June sun baking the concrete under our feet. "He bled out so fast," she went on, shaking her head. "One stupid argument over some plates, and now he's gone." The way she said, "gone," made my stomach twist. I asked if she'd known either of them before that day. "Not personally. The man came to my sales sometimes, always looking for antiques." The woman? Never seen her before. I thought back to the moment she'd lifted the plate, the flash of defiance in her eyes. That kind of thing doesn't come from nowhere. That evening, the local news ran a short segment about it. They didn't name the woman, only described her as a potential witness. The man's name was revealed, Robert Whitaker, 67, a retired postmaster and grandfather of 3. Seeing his smiling photo next to the words "yard sale dispute turns deadly" made the whole thing feel even more senseless. The following Saturday, I walked past the corner where the sale had been. The lawn was empty now, no tables, no boxes of trinkets. But there was a dark, uneven stain on the driveway, the kind that bleach and scrubbing can't quite erase. I stood there a moment, imagining the exact spot where he'd fallen. Cars passed behind me, their tires hissing on the asphalt, but the street felt too quiet. Across the street, a curtain shifted. Someone was watching me. I didn't linger. A week later, a friend told me the woman, her name was finally circulating, had left town. No charges had been filed, but she was getting cold stares at the grocery store, whispers in the library. She'd been, politely, asked not to come back to her church. "They'll never let her live it down," my friend said. "Doesn't matter what the police say." I didn't say it out loud, but I wasn't sure I'd let it go either. I'd seen the way she'd looked at him, not like someone bargaining over a trinket, but like someone determined to win. 3 months later, the yard sale incident was barely mentioned in the papers, replaced by other headlines. But for me, it stayed. Every time I saw a table of fragile dishes, I thought about how easily they could become weapons. One autumn afternoon, I passed an estate sale sign and felt that familiar tug of curiosity. But as I reached the edge of the driveway, I stopped. People were gathered around tables, picking up plates, mugs, vases. And all I could see was a man falling backward, a flash of white porcelain, and the red that followed. I turned and walked away. It was the kind of Saturday morning that feels like it could stretch on forever: clear sky, cool breeze, the faint smell of cut grass drifting down the block. I'd been up since 7, sipping coffee and half-heartedly scrolling through my phone when I decided to wander a few streets over. 2 houses down from the old elementary school, I saw the signs: neon poster board nailed to a telephone pole. Big moving sale, Saturday only, 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. An arrow pointed toward a quiet cul-de-sac where I could already see a scattering of cars parked along the curb. I turned in, weaving between neighbors lugging chairs and potted plants back to their cars. In the driveway of a tan split level, 3 folding tables were covered with neatly arranged tools, kitchen appliances, stacks of DVDs, and baskets of mismatched linens. The seller, a cheerful woman in a striped t-shirt, was haggling over the price of a blender with a man in a floppy sun hat. Music from a little radio played somewhere behind the garage. I started toward the table with the tools, hammers, wrenches, screwdrivers, all laid out in perfect rows. That's when I noticed him. He was standing near the far corner of the driveway, wearing a dark green hoodie despite the mild weather, the hood pulled low over a baseball cap. His jeans were worn, his sneakers scuffed. He picked up a heavy pipe wrench, turned it over in his hands, set it down, and then picked up a claw hammer. Something about the way he handled them, slow, deliberate, caught my attention. He wasn't checking prices or inspecting for rust. His eyes kept flicking upward, toward the seller, toward me, toward the people coming and going. When our eyes met, he held the look just a beat too long. "You working on a project?" I asked lightly, gesturing toward the tools. He didn't smile. "Just seeing what's worth taking." His voice was low and flat. I laughed awkwardly, unsure whether he meant taking in the buying sense or not. "There's more in that box by the garage," the seller called out, oblivious to the edge in his tone. He nodded but didn't move. By late morning, the crowd thinned. The music was turned down, and the seller started packing unsold books into a bin. I noticed the man was still there. He hadn't bought a thing. Now he was leaning against the side fence, hands shoved into his hoodie pocket, watching the driveway like he was waiting for something. Every time the seller ducked inside the garage to get more boxes, his gaze followed her. I told myself I was imagining it, but my stomach had that tight, restless feeling that comes when you know something's off. When only a few shoppers were left, I wandered toward the folding table nearest the garage. I could see into the dim interior, piles of cardboard boxes, an old lawnmower, shelves of canned paint. The man drifted closer, his sneakers crunching on the gravel. He picked up the same hammer from earlier, weighed it in his hand. "Sale's wrapping up," I said, trying to sound casual. "If you want that, you should grab it now." He tilted his head. "Not sure it's the hammer I want." Something cold flickered in my chest. "Excuse me." Before he could answer, the seller returned with a box of old extension cords. She gave us both a quick smile before turning away again. That was when he stepped forward, closing the distance between us in 2 strides. "You live around here?" he asked. I took a step back. "Just browsing." His grip tightened on the hammer handle. Shame if something happened in such a nice neighborhood. I felt my throat go dry. His tone wasn't loud, but there was weight in it, the kind of deliberate weight that made my instincts scream to get away. The seller had turned her back, rearranging cords in the bin. The two other shoppers who'd been browsing were now halfway down the street, chatting as they walked. I forced a laugh, though it sounded brittle in my own ears. "Well, thanks for the concern, but I should probably be going." I stepped around him, aiming for the driveway entrance. He moved with me, cutting off my path like it was a casual coincidence. His eyes were steady now, the brim of his cap casting them in shadow, but I could see the faint twitch of a smile at one corner of his mouth. "You didn't even look at the rest of the tools," he said. "I've got plenty at home. You don't look like the type who builds things." The sentence didn't make sense, but it was clear it wasn't meant to. It was bait, and I wasn't about to bite. "Good luck with your shopping," I said, brushing past him harder than I meant to. He didn't reach for me, but I could feel him watching my back as I walked to the street. I took my time leaving the neighborhood, glancing in the rearview mirror until the sale was out of sight. When I got home, I made tea, sat on the couch, and tried to convince myself I was just being paranoid. That illusion didn't last. The next afternoon, I stepped outside to grab the mail and saw him. Across the street, leaning against the lamppost like he was waiting for a bus that didn't exist. Same hoodie, same cap, same slow shifting from one foot to the other. My pulse spiked. He didn't wave or call out, just watched me walk back to my door. I locked it behind me and peered through the blinds. 10 minutes later, he was gone. By evening, I'd talked myself into believing it was a coincidence. Maybe he lived nearby. Maybe there really was a bus stop I'd never noticed. But the next day, he was there again. And the day after that. Sometimes across the street, sometimes leaning against the brick wall by the corner store. Always alone. Always watching. On the fourth day, I decided to test him. I stepped outside with my phone to my ear, pretending to talk to someone. I walked past him without looking directly, turned the corner, and ducked into a small coffee shop. Through the front window, I watched him stroll past, his head tilting slightly as he scanned the sidewalk ahead. I waited 20 minutes before heading home. He was gone. That night, I kept the porch light on and the blinds drawn. Every creak of the floorboards made me glance toward the door. It was a little after 10 when I heard the sound, the metallic click of the front gate latch. Then, slow footsteps on the path. I grabbed the nearest thing that could be a weapon, a cast iron pan, and stood in the kitchen, heart pounding. The steps reached the porch, then stopped. Silence. A moment later, the gate clicked again. Footsteps receded down the walk. The police took my call seriously enough to send a patrol car, but by the time they arrived, he was nowhere to be found. They suggested installing cameras and told me to stay vigilant. 2 nights later, I woke to a sound I couldn't place, a faint tapping, irregular but insistent. I crept to the front window and parted the blinds just enough to see the driveway. He was standing there, in the glow of the streetlight, tossing something small and metallic from one hand to the other. A hammer. I didn't think. I just called 911, my voice shaking. This time, when the cruiser pulled up, its headlights swept over him. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He just stood there until the officers stepped out and told him to drop the hammer. They took him in for trespassing and questioning, but an hour later, he was released. Not enough to hold him, they said. I haven't seen him in person since. But sometimes I'll catch a reflection in a shop window, or the shadow of someone leaning against a pole a little too still. And every time I walk past a yard sale now, I keep my distance from the tool tables. Because I know what it feels like when someone is weighing a hammer in their hand. And deciding what they really want to take. It was the first truly warm Saturday of the year, the kind of day that made you want to linger outside even if you didn't have anywhere to go. I'd been walking my niece, Emily, down Hawthorne Avenue, pointing out early tulips in the neighbors' yards, when we spotted a small crowd in front of the pale greenhouse at the corner. Tables were set up under the shade of a maple tree, each covered with clothes, books, and knickknacks. A few kids sat on the lawn sipping lemonade from paper cups. I could hear the low murmur of bargaining and the occasional burst of laughter. "Let's check it out," Emily said, tugging my hand. We tied her little terrier, Biscuit, to the wooden post at the edge of the lawn, making sure he had enough slack to lie down. He wagged his tail, happy just to watch the bustle. The host, a middle-aged woman with sun-browned arms, greeted us as we stepped up to a table covered in glassware. "Everything's half off afternoon," she said cheerfully. Emily wandered toward a box of children's books. I stayed by the glassware, running my hand over the rim of a heavy pitcher. That's when a sudden commotion from down the street caught my attention, a low, throaty bark that was getting closer. I turned to see a large dog, some kind of mastiff mix, trotting down the sidewalk with its tongue lolling. No leash, no owner in sight. Its muscles bunched and rolled under a dusty brown coat as it scanned the scene ahead. "That's Duke," someone behind me said quietly. "He lives 2 houses down. Guess the gate's open again." The dog slowed as it neared the yard sale, its head lowering. Biscuit barked from his spot by the post, a sharp, yipping alarm. Duke's tail gave one slow wag. Then he lunged. It happened in a blur. 1 second, Duke was on the sidewalk, the next, he was barreling into the yard, scattering a stack of books from a low table. People jumped back as his deep bark filled the air. Biscuit yanked at his lead, barking frantically. Emily screamed and ran toward him, but I caught her arm just in time. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice cracking. Duke's eyes locked on the smaller dog. He charged, knocking over a plastic crate in his path. The host yelled, waving her arms, but the mastiff didn't even glance at her. I sprinted forward as Duke reached Biscuit, but the big dog was faster. His jaws snapped, missing by inches as Biscuit darted sideways, his leash tangling around the post. Duke lunged again, and this time his teeth caught the loose fur along Biscuit's side. Emily screamed louder, trying to pull free from my grip. "He's hurting him." I grabbed the nearest thing I could, a folding chair, and shoved it between the dogs. Duke released Biscuit, but instead of backing off, he swung toward me. His bark was deafening this close, his teeth bared. "Somebody grab him," a man shouted from behind me. A tall guy in a work shirt rushed in, clapping his hands and yelling. Duke turned toward him, growling low. The man kept moving forward, trying to angle himself between the dog and the crowd. It almost worked, until Biscuit barked again. Duke spun back toward him, closing the gap in 2 strides. Duke lunged at Biscuit with a force that made the wooden post rattle in the dirt. Biscuit tried to backpedal, but the leash kept him close. In a panic, I dropped the chair and dove toward the post, fumbling at the knot. "Hold him off!" I shouted to the man in the work shirt. He grabbed Duke's collar, or tried to. The mastiff whipped his head sideways, teeth snapping in the air, and the man jerked his hand back just in time to avoid being bitten. Biscuit yelped as Duke's paw clipped his side. My fingers finally worked the knot loose and I scooped Biscuit up, his tiny body trembling against my chest. But Duke wasn't done. He reared up on his hind legs, front paws striking my hip, claws scraping through the thin fabric of my shirt. The smell of his hot, panting breath filled my nose. "Back!" The man in the work shirt bellowed, shoving at the dog's shoulder. Duke dropped to all fours and spun, this time aiming at him. The host had disappeared for a moment, but now came running back with a broom, smacking it against the ground between the dog and the crowd. "Go on! Get out of here," she yelled. The broom startled Duke just enough that he turned, ears back, and bolted a few steps toward the street. For one heartbeat, I thought it was over. Then he saw a teenage boy standing frozen near the driveway with a paper plate of cookies in his hands. Duke charged him without hesitation. The boy dropped the cookies and tried to run, but Duke's size made him faster. He leapt, front paws slamming into the boy's chest and knocking him backward onto the grass. The boy screamed as Duke's jaws clamped onto his leg. People were shouting now, a chorus of panicked voices. The man in the work shirt kicked at Duke's side, trying to get him to release. Another man threw a half-empty cooler of ice water over the dog, but Duke only growled, shaking his head with the boy's pant leg still in his mouth. Finally, over the shouting, another voice cut through, deep, commanding. "Duke! Down!" A man in a faded red sweatshirt was sprinting up the street, a leash dangling from one hand. Duke's owner. The mastiff hesitated at the sound of his voice. "Drop it, boy. Now." After a tense few seconds, Duke released the boy and backed away, tail low. His owner clipped the leash to his collar, wrapping it tightly around his wrist. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," the man panted, looking from the injured boy to the scattered tables. "The gate, it's broken. I thought I latched it." The host's voice shook with anger. "You need to get him out of here right now." The boy was curled on his side, holding his leg, his jeans torn and dark with blood. Someone had already called 911, and I could hear sirens in the distance. When the paramedics arrived, they moved quickly, cutting the boy's pant leg and wrapping gauze around the wounds. He was pale and shaky but conscious, answering their questions in a small voice. I kept Biscuit pressed against me, feeling his rapid heartbeat begin to slow. Emily clung to my arm, her face pale. The police took statements from everyone nearby. The owner repeated his apologies, but each time his eyes flicked toward the crowd, he looked smaller, like the weight of every stare was pressing him down. Duke sat by his side, panting, tongue lolling, looking, absurdly, like an entirely different animal than the one who had just turned the yard sale into chaos. As they loaded the boy into the ambulance, I caught the expression on his mother's face. She had arrived just in time to see her son lying on the gurney. That look, part fury, part fear, was something I knew Duke's owner would never forget. Later, as the tables were righted and shards of broken glass swept into a bin, the host came over to me. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, though my knees still felt weak. "You kept your head. That little dog's lucky you were here." I glanced down at Biscuit, who was nestled against Emily now, eyes half closed. "I think we both got lucky." As we walked home, Emily was quiet for a long stretch before finally saying, "I don't think I like yard sales anymore." I didn't have the heart to tell her I felt the same. In the spring of 2019, the neighborhoods around Maple Grove, Oklahoma, were coming alive after a long winter. Garage sales sprouted up like weeds, bright signs taped to lampposts, arrows chalked onto sidewalks, and folding tables stacked high with everything from vintage lamps to mismatched Tupperware. For most of us, it was a harmless tradition, a way to clear out our clutter and maybe make a few extra dollars. But by the end of that year, everyone would know the name, the Maple Grove Stalker. At first, no one thought much of the stories. A woman on Sycamore Lane mentioned at book club that a man had hung around her yard sale for over an hour without buying anything. He'd asked strange questions about the layout of her house, whether she kept tools in the garage or basement. She'd laughed it off at the time. 2 weeks later, a similar story came from a neighbor across town. A man had come right as they were packing up, asking if he could look inside for more items. When she refused, his smile vanished. That night, she woke to find her back gate wide open and muddy boot prints in her driveway. By June, the pattern was clear. It was a Saturday morning when I had my first run-in with him. My sister and I were hosting a sale in front of her small brick house on Willowbend Drive. We dragged half the contents of her attic into the yard, a jumble of old baby clothes, camping gear, boxes of records, and a battered recliner we'd priced at $20 just to get rid of it. Around 11, I noticed a man standing just beyond the tables. He was in his mid-40s, average height, wearing a plain ball cap and a gray t-shirt. His eyes moved constantly, over the items, over us, over the open garage. "You looking for anything in particular?" I asked, forcing my voice into something friendly. "Tools," he said. Or anything valuable you might be keeping inside. I laughed, thinking it was a joke. He didn't laugh back. My sister stepped closer to me. "We've got a few things in that bin," she said, pointing to a box of wrenches and pliers. He picked one up, weighed it in his hand, and set it down without comment. He didn't leave. By noon, most of the shoppers had moved on. The man lingered near the driveway, leaning against the mailbox. Every time my sister carried a box into the garage, his gaze followed her. Finally, she whispered, "I don't like this. Let's wrap it up." We started packing quickly. As I carried the last box inside, I glanced back. The man was gone. That evening, my sister called me, her voice shaking. "Someone tried to open the back door just now," she said. I heard the knob rattle. When I turned on the porch light, I saw a man walking away down the alley. She described him, and my stomach dropped. It was the same man. Over the next few months, we heard more stories. A woman on Birchwood who caught him peering through her garage window, a retiree on Linden who woke to find muddy footprints in her kitchen after leaving the back door unlocked. The police told people to call if they saw anything suspicious, but the man never stayed long enough to be caught. He avoided security cameras, choosing streets where the only surveillance was nosy neighbors behind curtains. By August, fear had replaced the easy camaraderie of garage sale season. People stopped hosting alone. Some stopped altogether. But the man didn't stop. In mid-September, the Maple Grove Neighborhood Association decided enough was enough. At the monthly meeting, normally reserved for discussions about lawn ordinances and fall festival plans, the talk was all about him. Mrs. Carruthers, who'd lived on the same street for 40 years, stood up with her arms folded tight. "I saw him outside my place last Friday," she said. "Didn't touch a thing, just stood there watching my garage until my son came out. Then he walked off like it was nothing." "He's getting bolder," another man said. "Next time he's not just gonna watch." The police liaison officer was there, a tall man named Delgado. He didn't sugarcoat it. "We believe this individual is targeting sellers who are alone or who leave their garages open. He's patient, and he's careful. But he's human, and we can use that." That was when the idea of the decoy sale came up. The plan was simple: set up a convincing garage sale on a quiet street, staff it with volunteers, and keep watch from hidden vantage points. 3 homes on Hawthorne volunteered to host simultaneously, hoping the activity would draw him out. I joined as one of the sellers, stationed at the middle house with 2 other women, Mary and Janelle. We laid out tables of donated items, lamps, fake jewelry, old toys. A couple of toolboxes were placed just inside the open garage, bait. We had tiny earpieces connected to Officer Delgado and his team, who sat in unmarked cars at both ends of the street. The morning passed with normal customers, a dad buying kids' books, a woman looking for plant pots. By noon, the flow had slowed, the sun high and warm. I was beginning to think we'd been wrong. Then I saw him. He appeared from the corner, same cap, same restless scanning eyes. My pulse kicked hard against my ribs. "Middle target approaching from south end," I murmured into the earpiece. "Copy," Delgado's voice said back, calm and steady. He walked slowly up the driveway, hands in his pockets. "You got any better tools than that?" he asked, nodding toward the bait boxes. Mary smiled politely. "That's all we put out today. You keeping the good stuff inside?" His eyes flicked toward the garage door. "Nope," I said, keeping my tone neutral. He lingered a beat too long, gaze roaming over us, the tables, the house. Then he stepped toward the garage like he might just take a look. That was when Delgado's car rolled up to the curb. 2 plainclothes officers stepped out, approaching from opposite sides. The man froze. "What's this?" "Sir, can we talk to you for a moment?" one officer said. For a second, I thought he'd run. But he didn't. He straightened, gave a short laugh, and said, "Sure. I got nothing to hide." He was wrong. The search of his beat-up sedan revealed a crowbar, duct tape, a hunting knife, and a backpack full of items later traced to thefts around town: jewelry, a tablet, cash envelopes. His name was Thomas Eldon, 44 years old, no fixed address. He had a history of burglaries in 3 states and had been drifting between small towns for years, always targeting the same kind of events. When the news broke, the relief was almost physical. At the next neighborhood meeting, people clapped when Delgado walked in. But even with Eldon in custody, something in Maple Grove had changed. Garage sales were fewer. Tables were set closer to the street, with doors locked and eyes always on the crowd. For me, the worst part wasn't the months of unease. It was the moment in the driveway when I realized he was about to step into the garage, that thin, invisible line between harmless browsing and something darker. And how easily it could be crossed. Alright, starting story 6, based on the Karen Swift case, but with new names, timeline adjustments, and expanded detail to make it richer and longer. The fall of 2016 was colder than usual in Harrow Creek, a small Tennessee river town where the trees blaze orange before surrendering to the wind. Everyone knew everyone there, or at least thought they did, and strangers stood out like spilled ink on paper. Mary Ann Cole was not a stranger. She was a 42-year-old mother of 3, a Sunday school volunteer, and the kind of neighbor who'd bring over banana bread just because she'd made too much. On October 22nd, she decided to hold a yard sale. Her driveway, shaded by a massive pecan tree, was lined with folding tables loaded with old toys, extra kitchen gadgets, and stacks of paperbacks. From morning until early afternoon, the yard was busy with neighbors and the occasional passerby from the highway. I stopped by around 10 that morning. Mary Ann was in jeans and a flannel shirt, her hair pulled back, cheeks flushed from the crisp air. She gave me a hug and insisted I take a slice of pumpkin bread before I even looked at the tables. We chatted about nothing much, how her youngest had started soccer, how she was finally getting around to clearing out the attic. Then a customer distracted her, and I moved on, not thinking it would be the last time I saw her alive. That evening, Mary Ann attended a Halloween fundraiser at the Harrow Creek Community Hall. Photos posted to Facebook later showed her smiling with friends, wearing a witch's hat tilted just so. Several people recalled her mentioning she was tired but happy from the yard sale earlier. She left the party just after 11 p.m. The drive home was less than 10 minutes. By morning, her car, a white 2007 Nissan Rogue, was found abandoned on a narrow county road 3 miles from her house. Both passenger side tires were flat. Her purse and phone sat in the front seat. The keys were still in the ignition. There was no sign of Mary Ann. When the news broke, Harrow Creek mobilized. Volunteers gathered at the fire station, maps spread over folding tables. Search parties fanned out into the woods, combing through underbrush and peering into ditches. I joined one of the early searches. The cold air burned my lungs, and the sound of boots crunching through dry leaves was constant. Every rustle made me turn my head, expecting to see her stepping out from behind a tree, embarrassed for causing so much fuss. But hours turned to days, and nothing turned up. Rumors began to swirl. Some said she'd been abducted by someone who'd come to the yard sale. Others whispered about her estranged husband, David Cole, who was still living in the family home despite a pending divorce. They had been seen arguing outside the post office 2 weeks earlier. David denied any involvement. "I loved her," he told reporters. "We had our problems, but I'd never hurt her." The search continued into November, the leaves now sodden and heavy. Police kept their findings close, but the whispers never stopped. Some pointed to a man seen at the yard sale who no one recognized, tall, with a black baseball cap pulled low. He'd browsed for nearly an hour without buying anything. A few swore they'd seen him leave in a dark SUV parked a block away. Others brought up the possibility that her flat tires were intentional, meant to force her to stop on that deserted road. By December 1st, hope was wearing thin. On the morning of December 8th, a hunter walking near the old Stonebridge cemetery caught sight of something pale under a tangle of branches. It was Marianne's body. She had been hidden under leaves and debris less than 3 miles from where her car was found. The autopsy revealed blunt force trauma to the head. The news of her discovery tore through Harrow Creek like a winter storm. Church bells tolled for her that Sunday, but the sound felt wrong, too hollow, too final. The police held a press conference on the courthouse steps. Chief Madsen, a heavy-set man with deep creases in his forehead, confirmed that Marianne's death was being treated as a homicide. He refused to comment on possible suspects. For the rest of that week, I don't think I went more than 6 hours without someone mentioning her name. The hardware store clerk said he'd seen her at the yard sale talking to a man he didn't recognize. The waitress at Lou's Diner claimed she overheard Marianne telling a friend she was uneasy about someone who'd come by the house the week before. And then there was David. David Cole kept to himself after the discovery, blinds drawn at all hours. Reporters camped outside his driveway for days, but he never came out to speak to them. He had an alibi for the night she disappeared. He said he was home with their eldest son, but people still whispered. I couldn't forget a conversation I'd had with Marianne the month before. We were sitting on her porch, drinking coffee, when she'd said, almost offhand, "I think David wants me gone more than he admits." I'd asked what she meant, but she'd just shaken her head and changed the subject. Detectives interviewed him several times. They also tracked down the tall man in the black baseball cap. He claimed he'd been just looking at the yard sale and left without buying anything. His story checked out, at least enough for them to let him go. Winter settled in, and with it came silence. No arrests. No new announcements. People stopped talking about if the case would be solved and started saying when. The only time the subject came alive again was when someone mentioned the yard sale. It had been the last normal day anyone saw her, and it now seemed impossible to separate from the tragedy. In March, a group of us gathered to plant a dogwood tree near the cemetery in her memory. Her children stood beside David, all of them in black coats, faces pale against the cold wind. After the short ceremony, I overheard one of the detectives, a younger guy named Colson, speaking quietly to the pastor. "It's in the details," he said. "We think someone planned this. The flat tires, that wasn't an accident. That stuck with me. Planned. Someone had known where she'd be, when she'd be driving home, maybe even that she'd take that particular road. And the idea that they could still be walking among us, smiling, waving, pretending to grieve, made my skin crawl. Even now, years later, her murder sits in a cold case file. The reward for information has doubled, but no one has stepped forward. I sometimes drive past her old house. The pecan tree is still there, branches reaching over the driveway where she once laid out card tables and smiled at neighbors. I never stop. Because somewhere out there, someone knows exactly what happened after that yard sale. And they've stayed silent this long. It was the first chilly Saturday of November, the kind where the air smells faintly of wood smoke and you can see your breath if you exhale slow enough. I'd been walking my usual morning route through the older part of town when I spotted a yard sale sign taped to a leaning telephone pole. The arrow pointed toward Oakview Street, a block of weathered bungalows with sagging porches and patchy lawns. I almost passed it by, but curiosity got the better of me. At the end of the street, an elderly man sat behind a folding table in his front yard. He wore a thick brown cardigan over a button-up shirt, and a wool cap tugged low over his ears. The table in front of him was neatly arranged, old books with frayed spines, a few porcelain figurines, a tarnished silver tea set, and a box of yellowed postcards bound in twine. "Morning," he greeted, his voice warm but tired. "Morning," I replied, giving the books a quick glance. My eyes landed on an old hardback with a cracked green cover. "Good stories in that one," he said. Some of them even claimed to be true. Couldn't finish it myself, too spooky for my taste. I smiled. Spooky's right up my alley. He chuckled and went back to sipping from a steaming mug. The quiet between us felt comfortable. That is, until the rumble of an engine broke it. A black pickup truck rolled slowly down the street, bass thumping from inside. It came to a stop right in front of the man's yard. 4 teenagers piled out, 3 boys, 1 girl, all in hoodies and baseball caps. Their movements had that restless, testing energy, like they were looking for trouble before they even knew where they'd find it. One of them, a lanky kid with a buzz cut, kicked a ceramic garden gnome sitting by the curb. It toppled over and split into jagged pieces. The old man's smile faded. "Hey now," he called out, "no need for that." The kids didn't answer. One of the boys, skinny, dark-haired, with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes, walked straight to the table. He picked up a porcelain figurine, turned it over in his hand, and asked, "How much?" $5, the man said evenly. The kid snorted. $5 for this piece of junk? He tossed it up in the air and caught it with one hand, then let it drop to the grass. It shattered with a dull crunch. "That belonged to my late wife," the man said, his voice tightening. "I'd appreciate some respect." The smirk widened. "Respect's earned, old man." I froze where I stood, my hands buried in my coat pockets, wishing I had the guts to step in but feeling rooted to the spot. The old man reached for his phone. "I'll be calling the police." Before he could dial, the skinny kid lunged forward, snatching the phone and hurling it into the street. It skidded across the asphalt. "Now you're just making this worse for yourself," the man said, pushing up from his chair. Buzzcut stepped forward, shoving the man in the chest. He stumbled back, caught himself, and straightened again. That was when the first punch landed. The skinny kid's fist connected with the side of the old man's face, snapping his head to the left. His wool cap slipped halfway off, exposing thin white hair. He staggered but didn't fall, gripping the edge of the table for balance. "Hey!" I finally yelled, the word tearing out of my throat before I had time to think. My voice cracked in the cold air, but the kids barely glanced my way. The second punch came from Buzzcut, hard to the gut. The man bent forward with a grunt, and before he could straighten, the girl swung her boot into the back of his legs. He crumpled to the ground, knees hitting the frost-stiff grass. "Get his wallet," one of the boys said, almost casually, like it was a chore. Something in me snapped. I pulled my phone from my pocket and hit record as I shouted, "I'm calling the cops. Right now." The skinny one turned his head toward me, eyes narrowing. "You do that, you're next." But I kept the camera on him, making sure the red light was blinking. "Too late," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Smile." For a second, no one moved. The kid stared at me, the old man groaning on the ground, the wind rattling the dead leaves still clinging to the pecan tree overhead. Then the girl hissed, "Let's go." They bolted for the truck, kicking up clods of dirt as they ran. The engine roared to life, and in seconds they were tearing down the street, music blaring again as if nothing had happened. I ran to the man's side. His cheek was already swelling, and a thin ribbon of blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. "Stay still," I said, crouching beside him. "Help's coming." I dialed 911 with trembling fingers, giving the operator a quick description of what had happened, the truck's make and color, and the direction it had gone. She told me to stay on the line until officers arrived. By the time the police pulled up, lights flashing, tires crunching over the curb, a couple of neighbors had come outside. One brought a blanket, draping it over the man's shoulders. Another fetched his phone from the street. The cracked screen still lit up when I pressed the power button. 2 officers questioned me separately, asking for every detail I could remember. I showed them the video on my phone, shaky, but clear enough to catch the kids' faces as they turned toward me. "We'll run this through our system," one said. "See if we can match them to any local troublemakers." The ambulance arrived a few minutes later, and the paramedics helped the man to his feet. He refused the stretcher but let them guide him into the back to check for broken ribs. Before they closed the doors, he looked at me. His voice was rough, but steady. "Thank you for not walking away." That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of the punches kept replaying in my head, the dull, sick thuds against fragile bone. The next morning, I drove by Oakview Street. The table was gone, the yard empty. The only sign anything had happened was a few porcelain shards glittering in the grass like ice. A week later, I heard the police had picked up 3 of the 4 kids. They'd been identified from the video and from tips that poured in after the story aired on the local news. The 4th was still at large. The charges were serious: assault, attempted robbery, but in a small town, I knew there'd be pressure to treat them lightly. I still see the old man sometimes. He walks with a cane now. Every time he passes me on the sidewalk, he tips his wool cap and smiles. But it's a smaller smile than before. And it makes me wonder how many more smiles like his have been taken by people who think respect is optional. It was late July when I spotted it, the kind of humid morning where the air clings to your skin and even the cicadas sound tired. I'd been drifting from one yard sale to another, more out of boredom than anything else. My car already held a pair of mismatched lamps, a stack of old National Geographics, and a milk crate of vinyl records I probably wouldn't listen to. The next sale was at a small, yellow clapboard house at the end of Alder Street. A hand-painted sign out front read, "Moving, everything must go." The yard was dotted with tables, each covered with piles of items that looked like they'd been pulled straight from the attic: faded board games, chipped mugs, photo albums with curling pages. Behind one table stood a woman in her 50s, her hair pulled back with a red bandana. She smiled as I walked up. "Feel free to dig around," she said. "Prices are negotiable." I nodded, scanning the tables. Then, under a low bench at the far end, I saw it. A dented metal box about the size of a shoebox, its surface scratched and dull with age. It had a small latch on the front and no markings I could see from where I stood. "How much for the box?" I asked, crouching to get a better look. She glanced over her shoulder. "That was my uncle's. Not sure what's inside, I've never opened it." "Never?" She shook her head. "Found it in the back of the garage when we were clearing it out. Been sitting there for decades. $5 if you want to take your chances." $5 for a mystery felt like a fair gamble. I carried the box to my car, noticing as I set it in the passenger seat that it was surprisingly heavy for its size. There was also a faint hum to it, or maybe that was my imagination. Back home, I set it on the kitchen table and clicked open the latch. The lid creaked as I lifted it. Inside was a small, polished sphere of metal, about the size of a baseball. The surface was warm to the touch. Not hot, just warmer than the air around it. A strange symbol was etched into one side, a looping design I didn't recognize. Beneath it, wrapped in brittle tissue paper, was a stack of yellowed papers covered in equations and hand-drawn diagrams. The handwriting was neat but archaic, like something you'd see in an old engineering manual. Some of the pages were in English, but others were in a language I couldn't place. I turned the sphere in my hands. It was seamless, no screws, no panels, nothing to suggest it could be opened. The warmth felt unnatural. Curiosity got the better of me. I took a photo of the sphere and one of the pages, then posted them to a collector's forum online with the caption, "Anyone know what this is?" Replies started rolling in within minutes. Most were jokes: alien tech, part of a time machine, infinity stone. But one comment stopped me cold. "Get rid of it. Could be radioactive." I laughed at first. But then I felt the faint warmth against my skin again, and it didn't seem quite so funny. I was still thinking about that comment when a private message appeared in my inbox from someone with the username RadSafe. The message was short, direct, and had none of the casual tone of the public replies. Do not touch it again. Move it to a safe location away from where you live. I can help you. I stared at the words for a long moment, the faint hum, real or imagined, still in my head. I typed back, "Who are you?" The reply came within seconds. Nuclear safety consultant. I monitor posts like yours. Warm metal objects of unknown origin can be dangerous, especially if they're old lab prototypes or industrial sources. Describe it. I gave a brief description: size, weight, warmth, the strange symbol. I mentioned the old papers, the diagrams, the unfamiliar language. Another instant reply. Likely experimental. Could be from research predating modern safety protocols. Place it in a garage or shed, as far from people as possible. Do not put it near pets or children. I read that last line twice. My cat, Lila, was asleep on the windowsill not 5 feet from the kitchen table where the box sat. I grabbed a pair of leather gloves from the utility drawer and eased the sphere back into the metal box, then carried it outside to the garage. Every step, I expected to feel a sudden heat through the gloves, or hear a sound from inside the box. Setting it on the concrete floor, I stepped back quickly, almost tripping over an old snow shovel. When I returned to my computer, there was a final message waiting. Contact your state's hazardous materials department immediately. They will handle it. Do not attempt to open it. I didn't want to, but the weight of not knowing was worse than the fear of making it official. I found the number online and made the call. The woman who answered transferred me to a man whose voice was clipped and businesslike. Describe the object, he said. I repeated the details, and there was a pause on the other end. We'll send a team. Stay outside the garage until they arrive. Leave the object where it is. They showed up within an hour, 4 people in protective suits, face shields, and heavy gloves. They moved with the kind of precision that made me even more nervous. One carried a handheld device that clicked slowly at first, then faster as they neared the box. The clicks turned into a rapid staccato. The man holding the device gave a sharp nod to the others. It's radioactive, he confirmed, as if stating the obvious. You're lucky you didn't keep it inside longer. They lifted the box into a thick, lead-lined container, sealed it with heavy clamps, and loaded it into their van. What happens now? I asked. It'll go to a secure facility for testing, one of them said. If it's what we think it is, it was probably part of an old research project, maybe even military. That night, my house felt emptier than it should have. The kitchen table looked wrong without the dented metal box sitting there. A week later, a detective came by to ask questions. He told me the woman who'd sold me the box claimed she had no idea what her uncle had been working on. He'd been a chemist in the 1960s and 70s, moving between universities and private contracts. They never told me exactly what the sphere was, and maybe they didn't know. But for months afterward, I found myself thinking about it late at night, imagining that faint hum, the warmth against my palm, and wondering what would have happened if I'd left it on the table for days instead of hours. I still go to yard sales, but I keep my distance from anything that looks like it's been locked away for too long. Some mysteries are better left buried. It started with a stare. Monday morning, I left my apartment on the east side of Providence at 6:45, coffee in hand, tote bag over my shoulder, ready for the short walk to my car. The parking lot behind the building was nearly empty at that hour, just a few sedans and an old pickup under the flickering streetlight. He was leaning against the hood of my car. Mid to late 20s, dark hoodie pulled up over a baseball cap, hands stuffed into the kangaroo pocket. He wasn't smoking, wasn't on his phone. Just standing there, watching me approach. Can I help you? I asked, keeping my voice even but loud enough to carry. He tilted his head slightly, like he was studying me, then said, "Don't think anyone can help you." The words were delivered casually, almost lazily. I walked around him, unlocked the driver's door, and got in without another word. In the rearview mirror, he was still standing there as I pulled out of the lot. By mid-morning at work, I'd mostly shaken it off. Providence isn't New York, but you still get your share of odd encounters in the city. That night, nothing happened. The next morning, he was gone. But on Wednesday, I came home from work to find the welcome mat outside my door soaked through, drenched as if someone had emptied a bucket of water over it. A petty thing, but unsettling. I almost convinced myself it was a leak from the upstairs balcony, until I saw the wet footprints leading away from my door toward the stairwell. That same night, I heard something, a light tapping on my front door just after midnight. 3 taps, then silence. I didn't open it. Thursday morning, the escalation was impossible to ignore. My car windshield had been smeared with some kind of greasy, foul-smelling substance. The stench clung to my hands even after scrubbing. The parking lot camera was malfunctioning, according to the building manager, but I didn't believe in coincidences. I called the police, filed a report, and got the usual polite but detached assurances. "We'll keep an eye out." That evening, I booked a hotel across town for the weekend. If someone wanted to mess with me, they'd have to work harder to find me. But I still had to pack a few things from the apartment. When I came back Friday after work, the first thing I noticed was the door. Not broken in, just ajar. My stomach dropped. Inside, the living room was wrecked. Couch cushions slashed, coffee table overturned, picture frames shattered on the floor. My laptop was gone. My fish tank had been smashed, glass and water everywhere, the little orange bodies of my goldfish scattered among the debris. I stood there in the doorway, shaking, until my neighbor stepped out and saw me. "I heard noises about an hour ago," she said. "I thought you were home." The police came, took more notes, made more promises. But the whole time, I could feel a quiet certainty growing in me, this wasn't random. Whoever was doing this wasn't finished. I'd taken the metro to work, cutting through the morning crowd outside the Providence Place Mall. The air smelled like fried dough from the food court vents, and the streets were busy enough to feel safe. I was halfway down Exchange Street when I heard my name. It was called in a tone that didn't belong to friends, too sharp, too deliberate. I turned. He was weaving through the pedestrians, same hoodie, same ball cap, that faint grin pulling at the corner of his mouth. His eyes didn't blink much. Before I could react, he closed the distance and swung. The punch landed square on my cheekbone, a flash of light exploding behind my eyes. My coffee hit the pavement, splattering across my shoes. "You're not so hard to find," he muttered, close enough that I could smell the sourness of his breath. Then he walked off like nothing had happened, swallowed by the crowd. 3 people stopped to ask if I was okay. 1 offered to call an ambulance. I waved them off, humiliated and stunned. At the precinct, the officer on duty took my statement but kept glancing toward the clock. "You didn't get a photo?" he asked. "I was a little busy getting punched," I snapped. He raised his hands in mock surrender. All right. We'll add it to the report." By the time I left, the adrenaline had drained out of me, leaving only a hollow fatigue. That night in the hotel, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my duffel bag. Moving apartments wouldn't fix this, he'd already shown he could find me anywhere. At 2:14 a.m., I heard it again, 3 slow taps on my hotel room door. I froze. No one in the hall when I finally dared to look. Just the faint smell of something chemical, like paint thinner, hanging in the air. It was the first time I truly believed he might kill me. The next morning, I checked out early and went to stay with my brother 2 towns over. He had 2 big dogs, cameras on every corner of the house, and a .38 in his nightstand. For the first time in weeks, I slept. The police never caught him. Even now, I scan every crowd, every subway car, looking for that hood, that cap, those eyes that never seem to blink. I still hear those 3 taps in my head on quiet nights. And I still remember what he said in the parking lot the first day we met. Don't think anyone can help you. He was right about one thing. No one has.